Hello. Our first panel of today is No More Thoughts and Prayers, What the West Can Actually Do, which will discuss actionable steps and strategies that the West can take to offer maximum support to the Iranian people's struggle for freedom. Joining us for this panel are Kasra Aarabi, Director at United Against Nuclear Iran and non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, Morgan Viña, Vice President of Government Affairs at JINSA and previous Chief of Staff for International Security Affairs at the Department of Defense, Michael Rubin, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Iran, and Nufti Vice President Khansarinia. Moderating this panel is Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran, whose research specialties include U.S. Middle East policy. Welcome to our speakers. Before the panel begins, Comrade Khansarinia will share a brief presentation outlining maximum support, Nufti's signature policy effort.
I'm very honored to be on this panel with such distinguished speakers. But before we go into the panel, since, as all of you know, our goal for this conference is not merely to talk about the problems that we're facing when it comes to Iran, not merely talk about the crises in the Middle East, be it this week's Hamas terrorist attack against Israel or all the other problems facing the U.S.-Iran relationship, but to talk about solutions to these problems. And that's why I'm particularly excited for this panel. It's a personal honor for me to be seated aside such distinguished experts, and it's a real honor for Nufti to host these fine individuals. And in order to kick off this session, we want to talk a bit about maximum support. Many of you are probably familiar with maximum support, Nufti's strategic policy initiative, and it was actually at the Iran conference last year where we first came to talk a bit more about this idea, and it was on a panel much like this one, actually, where a friend of many of my fellow panelists today, and probably many of you, Ray Takei, said, when we talk about Iran policy and when we talk about supporting the people of Iran, I'm tired of just hearing about reforming VOA. Can somebody offer some solutions? And that was where the idea to sit down and put this policy piece together came about. But before we get into that, let's talk about why we're doing this. Particularly less than 1 week after the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel, I think the Islamic Republic's role in the Middle East and supporting terror is clear for all of us. The thousands of lives that have been taken are obvious, but this is a bit more of the Islamic Republic by the numbers. 30,000 Iranians dying annually because of pollution caused by the Islamic Republic's mismanagement. More than 70% of the economy remaining state-controlled, not allowing any innovation or growth whatsoever, which we'll be discussing later this afternoon. $95 billion confiscated from the Iranian people over the past several decades, be that of Iranian Jews or Iranian Baha'is, Iranian businessmen and women, confiscated by the Islamic Republic. 18,000 pro-democracy protesters jailed in just the last year alone. 16 million Iranians forced to leave the countryside because there's no opportunity. 99% of Iran's Jewish population forced to leave the country since 1979. And we can go on and on. But this is a problem that we all know. But when you look at it in numbers like this, it becomes much more stark. And unfortunately, for 4 decades, the United States, in our view at Nufti, has lacked a strategic policy, or really a policy, towards Iran. And we believe that U.S. policy has failed because it's been based on a false premise. Whether through force or whether through appeasement, the entire premise of U.S. policy towards Iran has been based on the notion that the Islamic Republic can or will change its behavior. We believe that that premise has been proven to be false over the past 44 years, and that the only change that can come is a democratic one brought about by the Iranian people themselves, and maximum support is meant to offer the U.S. government solutions to do that, and we believe it's time for a strategic shift from ambiguity or force or appeasement towards maximum support. Now, maximum support critically recenters the Iran debate on the true sovereigns of Iran, the Iranian people, the critical actor that for 4 decades have been missing in this debate. The US government has for too long, and also Western governments have focused solely on either applying pressure on the Islamic Republic or appeasing, or as they would call it, engaging in diplomacy with the Islamic Republic. But that has far too often left the Iranian people, the real actors, out of that equation, and maximum support recenters it on the Iranian people. But critically, as American citizens and as a group active in Washington, maximum support is meant to address not only the democratic aspirations of the people of Iran, but America's national security, economic, and moral interests. This is not just a policy to benefit the people of Iran, but a policy that we believe benefits the United States in so many ways. And it offers, for the first time, a comprehensive Iran policy and what we believe is a blueprint for policymaking, because as Ray Takei said last year at this conference, we're tired of just hearing about reforming VOA. There have to be actual solutions. And so over a period of 6 months and in consultation with many of the distinguished speakers on this stage, many of you in this room, and many others, the Nufti policy team put together maximum support, which we believe offers a comprehensive framework in addition to and working in conjunction with maximum pressure. We believe that applying maximum pressure on the Islamic Republic and offering maximum support to the Iranian people is finally a strategic policy option to the US government. These two cannot work without the other. Simply applying maximum pressure and hoping that the regime will change its behavior is still continuing the same false premise of the past 44 years, and merely supporting the Iranian people without holding the Islamic Republic accountable for its crimes and its terrorism through maximum pressure will also be incomplete. So maximum support is 15 points. We have copies of it. It's, of course, available on Nufti's website as well. Many of you will have probably read it. I'm not going to go through each of the 15 points, just to say that finally, and many of my esteemed colleagues on this panel have their own excellent solutions as well, and I'm sure we'll discuss them, but a 15-point policy proposal that goes through each area of the US government, from the US Congress to different executive departments, the State Department, the Treasury Department, Homeland Security, national security agencies, and what they can specifically do to support the people of Iran and hold the Islamic Republic accountable. So the cry from Washington, the cry from many in different administrations that there were no solutions or they didn't know what to do to help the people of Iran is no longer a solution that we will accept, because these aren't perfect solutions, but at least it's a start and there are solutions. And I look very much forward to engaging in a conversation about this with my esteemed colleagues, and thank you all for listening to me drone on.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be back at Nufti. I'm a big fan of all your work, a true voice of the Iranian American community, and thanks to Cameron and Dr. Ganji for the invitation today. As we're speaking, we are witnessing barbaric behavior by Hamas against Israel, and I'm reminded about what the Iranian people have been telling the international community about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which arms and funds Hamas. Common chants during the Women Life Freedom movement were, the IRGC is our ISIS. Fast forward today, those words ring so true. Babies murdered, elderly women burned alive, Holocaust survivors taken hostage are only some of the atrocities we've been witnessing this week, and they've been enabled by the Islamic Republic. Sadly for the Iranian people, this is nothing new. They have a singular voice in warning the world about the dangers of this regime, but for too long, the world has not been listening to them. And I think it's time that they start listening to them and empowering them, because they are the answers to eradicating this evil. So what can the West do to support their aspirations and to empower them? Here, our panel will discuss all this and more. I'm going to ask each panelist to open up with 2 to 3 minutes of opening remarks, and then I'll engage with a Q&A with them. If there's time, and we hope to open it up to the audience for question and answers. So, Cameron, let me start with you. Well, I love it. Morgan, we'll go Morgan.
Yes, first Morgan.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Nufti and to all of you for being here today. And what a week it's been, I think for all of us. And reflecting on not just this week, but the topic of the panel, I do think that the Biden administration needs a fundamental new approach to Iran. It's really too early to tell about how the attacks in Israel will affect the Biden administration's calculus with respect to Iran, but I am hopeful that this is the, excuse the turn of phrase, come to Jesus moment that they actually need. Since President Biden was Vice President Biden, and he was on the campaign trail, calling for a rollback of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign and further diplomacy with Iran. And then, of course, we saw, once he entered the White House, this approach of diplomacy. He's been hell-bent on re-entering into a JCPOA 2.0 of sorts. And frankly, what has that gotten us? You know, we see thousands of peaceful protesters dead, men, women, children. And then on last Saturday, we saw an Iranian-backed terrorist group wage, Israel's own 9/11. And so I wonder here if we think about where do we go from here, right? Where does the Biden administration go next? And I do think that this administration missed a fundamental opportunity last year during when the protest movement initially emerged. While I do think that the Biden administration and the people working for him are dedicated to human rights and they care deeply, it wasn't enough. We saw President Biden miss a huge opportunity in backing the Iranian protest movement and reshaping his approach to Iran. But as we think about what this approach would look like, I think it's worth considering an approach that JINSA has advocated for, and that is one of regime collapse. This includes applying economic, military, diplomatic, with public and private diplomacy, as well as political pressure on the regime. Clearly, economic pressure includes sanctions, but more importantly, enforcing the sanctions that we have. We've seen too often that this administration has refused to enforce the sanctions, and China has been able to purchase Iranian oil, and the regime has profited from it, and that revenue has gone directly into the hands of the IRGC. And then, of course, we need to restore military deterrence. Diplomacy, I think we need to be isolating Iran to the maximum extent possible. Too often, I think we are in reaction mode in this administration, and I think one of the pivotal points comes this past summer when we saw the UN Human Rights Council, of all organizations, they named Iran to the Social Committee. And what happened? What was the Biden administration's response? It took 2 weeks to issue a condemnatory statement. There was nothing that they did. They could have been more proactive, and yet these are, again, own goals, missed opportunities by the administration to really put pressure on the Iranian regime. I think that there are a number of other opportunities, working with the diaspora community in particular. I mean, you all here today are an incredible resource that I don't think this administration has really tapped into fully and has really, truly listened to. There are other opportunities to be working with Congress. I think, Nufti's maximum support report is an amazing place to start for Congress, and how Congress and the administration can work together to build support for the Iranian people, leading to the collapse of the Iranian regime. And so I feel that as we look forward, I'll note that Biden, and to do any of this, I think he truly wants to preserve the space for a nuclear agreement, but I think that time has passed. And it, unfortunately, I think takes a tragedy like the one that we've seen this week to really sort of wake this administration up. And so I do hope that moving forward, this administration takes a new approach. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Morgan. Kasra?
Thank you, Jason, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you to Nufti. And I want to start by saying that the people of Iran truly stand with the people of Israel. The existence of the Islamic Republic is an existential threat, both to the Israeli people and the state of Israel and to the people of Iran. So we really do stand with you. I want to take a step back when we discuss what we can do, because practical support is what we need here. The time for slogans is over. And to do that, we have to understand the pillars of the Islamic Republic. How does the Islamic Republic function? The Islamic Republic essentially functions on two pillars: the pillar of suppression and terrorism, and the pillar of propaganda, سرکوب و تبلیغات. The foundation of that is an economic resource, and whether that's through slush funds, through the black economy, whether it's through getting frozen assets unfrozen. So policy should be really geared towards targeting these two pillars and weakening them. If we want to move beyond the Islamic Republic, if we want a free Iran, we have to focus on targeting these two pillars. So the next question is, well, how do you target these two pillars? And the reason I say there's these two pillars and these two pillars only is because the Islamic Republic doesn't have a constituency, doesn't have a support base. It's lost that. We see, I've managed to get my hands on a recording from the IRGC's Baghiat Allah headquarters. And the IRGC commander himself states that based on our reading, we have, 20%, and this is them being, obviously, this is propaganda incorporated in this. They say we have, based on our own assessment, 20% support base. Well, you see that, 16 million, 50% of them are old age pensioners, as well as children. So really, we only have 8 million. 8 million out of a population of 80 million. Now, that even propaganda is incorporated into that, but the point being is they do not have a support base. They do not have a strong constituency. So it really is based off two pillars. So the next question is, how do we weaken these two pillars? And that's a combination. I want to run through some policy options here that I think we have to take. I think the US has a responsibility to lead this, because the Europeans, and I say this as a Brit, won't move without US support. So the transatlantic element here is absolutely key. And I'm not interested in getting into partisan politics. I'm an Iranian and then a Brit. So for me, the politics here, all I care about is Iran. If we look at the options, 3 policy steps that immediately must be taken. The US needs to work with its European allies to get the IRGC prescribed. That has to happen. The IRGC is a violent Islamist extremist organization. It is operating no differently to the likes of prescribed groups from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. The IRGC needs to be prescribed. That's one quick one. I'm going to race through these because I want to open it up, and when we can have this discussion, we can go into it in more detail. The second policy step that we've been calling for a while now, is to hurt that economic base of the regime, but also target its propaganda pillar. We need, and I say we, there needs to be a joint transatlantic task force to identify regime oligarchs, elites, and proxies. They are everywhere. They're everywhere in Europe. They're everywhere in the UK. They're in Canada. They're in the US. These individuals need to be targeted. They need to be sanctioned. They need to have travel bans imposed on them. Take their passports away. They need to be on the first flight back to Tehran. They should not be here living lavish lifestyles. They should not be here living lavish lifestyles on the Iranian people's money when the clerics and the IRGC commanders are killing our men and women in Iran. That simply cannot happen. That needs, by the way, US support. I've spoken to the Europeans, and every time you speak to the Europeans, and we've got a fantastic security minister, I'd like to say Tom Tugendhat is brilliant, and he's open to this idea, but we need American support. This needs to be joint. It needs to be a transatlantic initiative. We've done it with Russia. And this will scare the Islamic Republic. This hits them where it hurts. So that needs to happen as well. The third issue, I've worked tirelessly, and a small contribution, but to identify the networks of the Islamic Republic. So you've got the oligarchs, but you've also got the ideological networks that they've created, IRGC centers. You have got a plethora of hardline ideological organizations in Europe particularly, but also in America, also in Canada. Whenever we expose these organizations and centers, the last one was a few weeks ago, we exposed an IRGC cell in London. The response is, we'll open a lengthy bureaucratic inquiry. That's simply not good enough. You know, a few weeks ago, we exposed the Islamic Students Association of Britain, which is connected to the Islamic Students Association of Europe, an entity that is controlled by the Beit Rahbari. They hosted senior IRGC officials. They hosted 3 of those IRGC officials, a senior IRGC Lebas Shakhsi commanders. One of them, Saeed Qasemi, has on record stated that he trained Al-Qaeda in 2019. In these speeches directly to British Muslim students, they are glorifying IRGC terrorism, they are propagating extreme anti-Semitism, and even calling on British Muslim students to join an apocalyptic army to, in their own words, to end the lives of Jews worldwide. We don't need lengthy bureaucratic inquiries. All the evidence is there. These people, these centers, they need to be targeted with Magnitsky sanctions. They all linked to Ayatollah Khamenei, the gross human rights violator who's responsible for all the bloodshed. So that's another issue that we need to focus on. Have I still got time?
I want to...
1 minute.
Just one more.
1 minute. Okay. Then there's another one, but I'll move on to the diaspora, because I think the diaspora has a really, really key role here to play as well. When we say maximum support and maximum pressure, we have to step up as well. And I think, look, there have been some great calls for the US, for example, to the call for the creation of a strike fund, which I think, by the way, is a brilliant idea. If the US isn't going to unfreeze our assets to fund this strike fund, we have between 8 to 11 million Iranians abroad, an Iranian diaspora community, the majority of whom are very successful. Why don't we create our own strike fund? The same goes with Starlink, the provision of internet. This is, again, practical support. The Iranian people need practical support. If the West isn't going to do it for us, we need to mobilize. We can do it. Provision of Starlink, Ioanni has launched Project Constellation. That is it's an entity where we can make direct donations as an Iranian community to ensure the provision of Starlink in Iran's borders. And these examples, so Starlink, Strike Fund, communications, strategic communications is another thing that we need to focus on. We need to come together as a diaspora community. There's been a lot of division. We need to come together now, and even if we disagree with each other, let's put that aside for a second and think about practical support, because that's what the Iranian people need, practical support. And we can do it ourselves. We need to start believing in ourselves, and we need to come together as a community, not just rhetorically, but in terms of we need to put money behind this. We need to find ways to support the Iranian people. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Kasra. Michael?
Thank you very much. Thank you to Dr. Ganji, to Cameron, to Nufti for having me. If there's been one event, of course, since the past year, it's been that there can be no more illusion about the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. All of you know that it had no legitimacy, but too many people in the United States looked at the trappings of power, associated that with legitimacy. Thank God that that illusion is now stripped bare. I want to commend the work of Nufti with regard to maximum support, but I also want to drill down on one item which I feel is missing. Before I do that, the do no harm bullet is incredibly important. Enough with politicians selling out the freedom of the Iranian people for a donation from Miriam Rajavi. Enough with this illusion of ethnic separatist movements. The worst thing that the United States can do is signal to the Iranian people, the vast majority of whom are nationalists, that we mean Iran harm. The Iranians are an ally. It's not an enemy state, and we've got to stop treating Iran in such a way that we will not be able to come back from the brink. I know from my experience in Iraq, when the change happens, it happens quickly, and we've got to be prepared to hit the ground running, which is why Nufti's report is so important. Now, when I lived in Iran decades ago now, one thing that became clear from wandering around, doing my dissertation research, meeting people and so forth, is one of the greatest intelligence failures that persists within the United States. We always talk about hardliners or reformers in the political sphere, but we don't talk about the factional divisions within the Pasdaran. And as we've seen through the protest movement, until the Pasdaran is fractured, until it's brought to collapse, they are going to be the Praetorian Guard which fires on the Iranian people, murders the Iranian people, and suppresses the aspirations for freedom of the Iranian people. Therefore, I would argue that what one focus of the United States policy must be is how do you sow division within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? We all know, anecdotally, that it's not homogenous. But even though Rand Corporation and others have said, well, there's this faction and that faction, we just don't have precision. Now, when I would wander around Iran, and this was just my first time 8 years after the Iran-Iraq War ended, after Khomeini drank from that chalice of poison, and hopefully every official within the Islamic Republic will soon drink from their own chalice of poison. But it was clear that veteran services within the Islamic Republic of Iran are horrible. As much as Americans complain about the VA, in Iran it's exponentially worse. Now, I've had the privilege of teaching for the US Navy for a decade. I spent more than a year at sea talking about Iran and other problem sets in the Middle East for deployed American Navy and Marines. And one thing I did as I learned about the Navy is understand the concept of these hospital ships which we send to areas in need. This may seem out of the box, but why don't we send a hospital ship to Dubai and offer veterans of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps free medical care? Either they take it, which is a huge propaganda win for the United States and shows the lack of legitimacy even from the so-called Praetorian Guard, or they're prohibited from taking it, which is only going to sow more division and highlight the failure of the Islamic Republic to take care of the people who, in theory, are their ideological supporters. At the same time, and the hospital ship can't get attacked because Dubai holds so much Iranian money that the Iranians have no ability to do that. I mean, it would be suicidal for them. Now, beyond that, when I talk to people anecdotally, some of whom have family members who have joined the Pasdaran, oftentimes they join not out of ideological conformity, but if they're going to get conscripted anyway, then why not get a little bit higher pay, more gasoline ration, and so forth? We've got to show that that is not an acceptable choice. No one who makes the moral decision, or the immoral decision, I should say, to join the Pasdaran should ever be able to get another visa to the United States, to Europe, or elsewhere. It's time to stigmatize the Pasdaran and have a laser focus. When we talk about the various points, it's time to direct the American intelligence community, the European intelligence community. My former roommate, Tom Tugendhat, would also abide by such thing, to focus. How do we dismantle this apparatus of terror upon the Iranian people? Because for all we wish, or I should say the Biden administration and others wish for muddle-through reform, until you deal with the Pasdaran problem, that reform isn't going to happen. The other and final point I would make is that the time is now. Too often, we look at policy in stasis. But the fact of the matter is, 83-year-old, partially paralyzed, cancer-stricken octogenarian ayatollahs tend not to have a long lifespan. And it's time to be prepared and hit the ground running. I'm not sure Europe is or the United States is, but this is where we all can take a lead. And so I conclude, again, by thanking Nufti for all their hard work. Thank you.
Can I just
Sure.
say that, Dr. Ganji, we should be making some internal notes. This was a big mistake because I now look horrible, and next time Mufti should not invite such good speakers to a panel that one of its own team members is sitting on, because by comparison, there's very little I can say or add.
Thank you for those very rich comments, and I want to drill down on a few of these points. I think we're in a moment now where the Ukrainian diaspora and the Ukrainian people, the Iranian people and the Iranian diaspora, and the Jewish diaspora as well around the world are demanding that the IRGC be listed as a terrorist organization. The United States has taken this step, but we are still waiting for our closest allies in Europe, the United Kingdom and the EU, in addition to other countries, Australia, New Zealand, et cetera, to take this step with the United States. So how can we get the international community to treat the IRGC as a terrorist organization where Hamas is already listed as a terrorist organization by the EU and the UK? So if the satellite is listed as a terror organization, but the mothership isn't, that just doesn't make sense. So how can we get our European allies to fill this gap? And Cameron, you want to start with you?
Sure. I think that before getting to your question directly, everything that the three of you said is so accurate, and I should say, as particularly to Dr. Rubin's point, Nufti is so thankful to all of our speakers who never get a speaker's fee, unlike Mrs. Rajavi's speakers, who I hear are paid quite handsomely, and our speakers are better anyways. The IRGC, as Dr. Rubin said, for Iranians really is a pariah already. They see, of course, there are those who are forced in perhaps some ways to join the service, but as Dr. Rubin said, that shouldn't be an excuse for their behavior. And if Iranians themselves, who are the ones who are struggling against the IRGC, they're the first and foremost victims of the IRGC. But they're not the only victims of the IRGC. The United States, American citizens are victims of the IRGC. The Jewish community, the bombing in Buenos Aires, are victims of the IRGC and the Islamic Republic's terror network. Our allies and friends, Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, are victims of the IRGC. So there's really no excuse now. It's not as if the IRGC's terror is isolated to the people of Iran or one group or one country. It really is an international pariah. And to your point, Jason, the fact that they would sanction the subgroups as terrorist groups, but not sanction the group itself, makes no sense whatsoever. And I think Kasra probably is better suited to get into some of the specifics than I about why the Europeans have been lacking in that department. The United States has, of course, done so. There was, as we all probably remember, some rumblings at the beginning of the Biden administration that President Biden was considering delisting the IRGC. The fact that he did not do that, I think, of course, you on this stage, but also the Iranian American community should take some credit for swiftly taking action, for swiftly raising pressure on the administration and saying that if they were to delist the IRGC, there would be a political cost. So to Castro's point about Iranian Americans taking this upon our own shoulders and not simply having our hands out hoping that Western governments will do something or that the United States will do something for the people of Iran, Iranian Americans themselves, in support of Iranians at home, have done a lot of advocacy on this and prevented, at least for now, the IRGC being delisted here in Washington. And also Iranians are extremely active in Europe, as I'm sure all of you know. Kasra certainly is well acquainted with Iranians being active on this point in Europe. As to why the British aren't listening or the Europeans aren't listening, there's lots that I've read, I'm sure all of you have read, about legalistic arguments, or it's not possible because it's a national military, etc., when everyone knows that the IRGC is not Iran's military. The word Iran does not even appear in the name of the IRGC. It's not the Iranian regime's Guard Corps, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is separate from the Artesh, or Iran's national military, and indeed was created out of a fear of Iran's Artesh, or national military. So the threat is to everyone. Surprisingly, President Biden was not weak on this point and actually held his ground. As to why the Europeans aren't, I'll perhaps pass to my fellow panelists.
Thankfully, President Biden rejected the advice of those who were pushing him to delist the IRGC, and those people who advocated for doing so were very quiet today. I would be as well,
I wonder if they were members of the Iran Experts Initiative.
potentially. Morgan.
So when the voice of God was introducing me, they went with my former DoD title. I was also chief of staff to Ambassador Nikki Haley up at the UN. And when she, I think it was her first week, when she came up to New York, she declared that she was going to be taking names against those member states that had an anti-Israeli bias, would not stand up for Israel, and quite frankly, those that would do Israel harm. And so I think that is exactly what the Biden administration needs to do now. Taking a look at what has happened over this past week, there can be no denying that the IRGC is a terrorist organization that supports other terrorist organizations. Hamas has been resourced by Iran for decades, while Hezbollah to Israel's north is more of a subsidiary of Iran, a proxy of the IRGC. I think what we're seeing specifically with Hamas right now, that is undeniable, that the IRGC supports terror across the world, and that is there in the eyes of the dead children that are displayed on TV on a daily basis coming out of Israel. And so I think moving forward, the Biden administration needs to look around the world, look at our NATO allies, including Turkey, take a hard look at them and demand that they take a stronger stance, not only against Hamas, but against the IRGC. Taking a look at our European allies, I think Congresswoman Tenney from New York has done an extraordinary job. She's been out in front of everyone. She got ahead of everyone here when she sent letters to members of the European governments telling them to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. She has done an extraordinary work in making sure that the world is well aware of the IRGC's crimes and the threat that it poses to its people. Our European allies, including our friends in the UK, are allowing Iranian flights to enter their airspace, land in their airports, and transfer weapons and material to Russia to kill Ukrainians. Europe needs to wake up, and the United States needs to use all diplomatic leverage to ensure that the IRGC is given its proper place on that terrorism watch list. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. Kasra?
You have a lot to answer for, Kasra.
Yeah, I remember we called, my former organization at the Tony Blair Institute, we called for the IRGC to be prescribed in January 2020. We were the first European organization to do so. And this was based off evidence that we had found. I'd unearthed the internal training manuals of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. These are the training manuals that are used to indoctrinate IRGC members and their families. So indoctrination now makes up more than 50% of training in the IRGC. So more than 50% of your training in the IRGC is ideological indoctrination. So what are they teaching their recruits is obviously the key question. They are teaching their recruits and their families to wage armed jihad against Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians on the basis that, quote, they have unacceptable faith and must either convert to Islam or must be killed. As well as that, they are calling on their recruits, they're calling on their members to not only kill Iranians who are opposed to the Islamic Republic, but torture them prior to their death based on the view that they are muharibs. And we know that many of the protesters in Iran have been killed, murdered, and tortured on the charge of being a muharib. So in terms of ideology, they are no different. It's also worth flagging that the Islamic verse from the Quran that is above the IRGC's emblem is the most cited Quranic verse by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So ideologically, they are no different to these prescribed organizations, but also in practice, look at their modus operandi, terrorism, hostage-taking, hijackings. We know how they behave. When it comes to prescription and the barriers to prescription, so the first thing that you will hear officials say, well, the IRGC is a sanctioned entity. Prescription's merely symbolic. That's false. That is a complete lie. Under the current sanctions regime, so as well as the IRGC conducting direct terrorist attacks or terror plots on European soil in Canada and elsewhere, the IRGC, particularly in the past few years, has doubled down on its efforts to nurture homegrown Shia radicalization and homegrown terrorism, using tactics very similar to that of ISIS Al-Qaeda, so through propaganda, through spreading extremist content at their centers, through their mosques, etc. The existing sanctions regime on the IRGC, however, does not prohibit the dissemination and propagation of violent Islamist extremist propaganda. So that's the barrier, that's the loophole that they are using, and they've doubled down on that. We see this. As I said, a few weeks ago in London, we exposed how British Muslim students tied to the Islamic Republic were communicating with the IRGC, the most senior IRGC commanders who belong to Mojtaba Khamenei's Habib Circle. This is the highest security intelligence circle in the Islamic Republic. That's not prohibited because of the existing sanctions regime. So the way to go around it and the way to make the point about prescription is it does not prohibit violent Islamist extremist propaganda. There is a growing homegrown Islamist extremist threat of terrorism, and we see this today. We're seeing this as we speak across Europe. So by prescribing the IRGC, you give government, you give the Charity Commission, you give tech companies a clear mandate to impose a full ban to prohibit any activity related to the IRGC. Not only that, it provides schools, it provides local communities with the right preventative tools to prevent and stop radicalizations in our local communities. When I say local communities, I mean our neighborhoods, our Western local communities. That does not currently exist. I've looked at the British Prevent Programme, I've looked at the European Union Prevent Programme, I've looked at individual countries. It is exclusively focused on Salafi jihadism. It is exclusively focused on Salafi jihadist radicalization. Very, very quickly, if I may, the point around conscription as well. There is so much misinformation around the point around getting conscripted in the IRGC. From 2010 onwards, so after the Green Movement protests, Khamenei doubled down on indoctrination. He wanted to create an more ideologically pure force. They did this first by increasing indoctrination from 30% to 50%, but also they changed the way they take their conscript intakes because they didn't want ordinary Iranians doing their conscription in the IRGC as they believed they would infect the minds of other members. So from 2010 onwards, they brought an internal law where the IRGC would recruit at least 70% of its conscripts, of its 50,000 conscripts, from the Basij, and these are active Basij members. The remaining 20%, so you've got 70% in some cities, like the major cities, you get almost 100% when there are enough active Basij conscripts. In other cities, the other 20%, you have Amrias. These are educated postgraduates. They have a direct choice, because they're postgraduates, they get more kind of prestigious office jobs rather than being a foot soldier. They have a choice to serve their Amria in the IRGC. If that person is doing so, we can say either they're materially driven, which that's on their conscience, or they are at least a little bit ideologically inclined, or fully ideologically inclined. And then there's a 10%, and that 10% in the smaller rural areas, it does come down to luck, but if you have the effective means to monitor and create task force to look into this, conscription should not be a barrier to prescribing the IRGC.
Thank you, Kasra. Michael?
Very, very quickly. I believe it was the Henry Jackson Society's Elizabeth Sampson who recently pointed out that with the October 18th snapback deadline looming, that the current crisis we see is being overshadowed and the deadline will probably be lost. It's hard to believe that Iran wouldn't see the advantage of having the crisis when they did, killing several birds with one stone. The logic of Mike Pompeo's maximum pressure campaign had to do everything with Khatam al-Anbiya. I hate this notion, well, only the Quds force or only certain elements are military, the rest are social or involved. I mean, if Greenpeace put bombs on buses, I wouldn't give a hoot what they did with the spotted owl. They would still be terrorists, period. And the logic of the maximum pressure campaign was because of Khatam al-Anbiya, because today it's the equivalent without moral equivalence of the Army Corps of Engineers, KBR, Halliburton, Bechtel, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Walmart, and ExxonMobil all mixed together, is anyone who's doing a partnership with that becomes susceptible to lawsuits. This is why Peugeot, for example, backed out of its partnership, I believe it was with Iran Khodro, which is a Khatam al-Anbiya run company. Now, where I would criticize the question just a little bit is it's not just Europe, it's also East Asia. Japan, which has always had a strong relationship with Iran, if I may, and putting on my nerd cap, going back to Amina Sultan's 1904 trip to Tokyo. Now, we've got a situation where whenever I talk to Asian companies, and also many European companies, they are scared to death of the reputational damage. Forget prescription, although that is hugely important and should be the top priority. Forget sanctions for a moment. Simply the reputational damage of being susceptible to lawsuits by family members of victims of terrorism, or from family members of those who had their eyes shot out. That is something that will allow or force companies to police themselves and figure the price of collaboration with the Pastaran and its cadre of companies simply isn't worth it. It needs to be another pillar to the legal strategy to name and shame these companies who are doing business with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, period.
Thank you, Michael. I want to now turn to how the Iranian diaspora can help, because I have witnessed over the last year an unprecedented degree of energy, activism, and passion in the community over the plight of their compatriots and their desire to change U.S. and European Iran policy. So how best can the Iranian diaspora force change in Washington and also in Europe? Cameron?
It's a critical question. Kasra brought it up, of course, earlier. I want to, if I can, dispel with what I think is a bit of a misnomer or a bit of a something that people just say, but I don't see an immense amount of overwhelming proof that it is true. Of course, it's important for people to be united. Of course, it's important for people to be on the same page about the big issues. I think that the Iranian diaspora largely is. I think that this notion of, people always lecturing, or Iranians lecturing ourselves of, you guys need to get your act together and get united, is overdone. I think that if you look at the change in the diaspora, which you referred to in your question, in the past 12 months, these massive successes, for example, something that was discussed yesterday on day one, the Massa Act passing the US Congress 410-3, that wouldn't happen if the Iranian diaspora, Iranian Americans weren't united. I think that, of course, if you go on Twitter, everyone is divided about everything. There's no unity on Twitter on any subject, on Iran, on US politics, on soccer, on anything. So I think this notion that Iranians are not united or Iranians need to work together is really overblown. In my opinion. Of course, again, you have to just put aside Twitter and any conversation you have about unity or anything, or really mental health in general. But Iranians are united, I think. I think Iranians have done a fantastic job. The success that they've shown in the past several months, again, with the Massa Act, the work that they're doing in Europe, these protests that you've seen, which have just been massive. I mean, tens of thousands of Iranians, most of the people in this room have probably been to one, if not all of them, in their time here in Washington, or in Paris, or in London, or in Los Angeles. And in those protests, of those tens of thousands of people, a few things have changed. Up until several years ago, you would have never really seen the Iranian flag. You would have seen the Islamic Republic's flag or something else. So Iranians are united around basic things. Their support of Iran's heritage, its flag, as Dr. Rubin said, its territorial integrity, which is a critical matter for all Iranians. But you also see people aligned on those major principles, but with different tactical views or different ideological views. You see monarchists next to Republicans, next to leftists, next to right-wing people, next to, God knows what. And amongst the Iranians, there's a lot of God knows what out there, I think. But people are united. And so I think that the first step is for that unity to continue. And for us, let's not sell what we've already got. Or what's the expression now that, you've sold it to somebody, don't buy it back. So let's not talk ourselves down from, oh my God, we're not united, oh my God, there's so much division. There's really not, I think. Of course, everything can be improved in the 5% on the extremes, but those people are out of the mainstream. For the mainstream, I think people in this room are united, people outside of this room on the streets, and they're united because they're inspired by the people of Iran who are united on the streets of Iran. The people on the streets of Iran aren't asking the person who's taking a bullet to their left or a rock to the face to their right, by the way, are you voting for a monarchy or a republic? They're saying, how the hell are we going to dodge this bullet that's coming right at us, and how are we going to take those guys over? And so Iranians, I think, abroad are inspired by that unity, and themselves are united, and I think they need to take the wins. I think our community is not really accustomed to political wins, and people were sort of shocked by the Mass Act. Like, how did this really get that far? Does it really mean anything? This 40 years of embedded skepticism and cynicism really has done a number on a lot of people, I think. And so to take those wins and go forward and get more, and so you take the win of the Mass Act, and you go through maximum support, point 1 through 15, we add the points that you find people on this stage have, and you get those done. And maybe it takes a different administration to do all of them, but we can start getting them done, whether it's here in Washington or in other European capitals.
Thank you. Morgan?
Thanks. First, I want to congratulate Mufti on your extraordinary work on the Massa Act. Truly,
And many others also.
Oh, absolutely. But I was getting to that. Okay. But I'd also like to congratulate everyone in this room who fought for that. I know Andrew in particular. I was on the phone with you, multiple times throughout that process, and I think the work that this community has done to really unite around that important piece of legislation is truly, truly extraordinary. With that said, I still do want to stress the importance of building on this momentum, and staying unified. And it's not something to just throw away, that we need unity, we need cohesion. I'm saying it from a practical sense. I work in government affairs, working with Capitol Hill, working with the administration, staffers, members of Congress, they don't want to hear multiple messages coming out of various groups from the diaspora community. They want consistency. Thank you. They want consistency. They want a very clear message to advise their bosses on where to go and the concrete steps they need to take. And so that is why, if you want to move the needle, that is why y'all need to be united. And I think with the Massa Act, we saw that. If we can get around, and I'm not Iranian, but if the
Honorary.
Oh, appreciate that. But if the Iranian community can get around big buckets of policy initiatives that they can all agree on and push for those with Congress, with the administration, I think you're going to see massive results. Thank you. I would also note that I think particularly, as I noted in my opening comments, that look, the Biden administration, quite frankly, the Trump administration, the Obama administration, haven't really done a really great job at working with the diaspora community, right? There is opportunity for that, but also I think that you have maximum chance of success if you do get around together some major commonalities that you are pushing for. And so truly, while I applaud the Massa Act and everything that this community has done, keep the momentum going. Thank you.
Before going to everyone else, you're exactly right about previous administrations not engaging the Iranian American community. I do, however, have to refer to one exception to that rule, and I think everyone in this room appreciates, and on this panel, the really excellent leadership of former Special Envoy to Iran, Brian Hook, who was just fantastic in that regard. And that rule stands. I think he's the one exception.
Thank you. Kasra?
Yeah, it's a very important question. And I want to echo some of the stuff that Cameron said. I had never seen, and I think my parents' generation had never seen, the scenes of the diaspora community coming together when we saw the protests break out, and that was every city in the world. We saw Iranians of different political views, inactive, active, for the first time coming out to support the people of Iran, and that was so key. In that moment, if you actually observe the Islamic Republic's communication, if you actually observed what the IRGC was saying, that was when they were worried. Because for the first time, the people of Iran and the Iranian community outside were connected. And that bond, I think, is a winning bond. And that really, you saw, Abbas Araghchi came out, and we should not let Iranians abroad mobilize like this on the streets of Europe. Now, at the same time, so I think that unity, that point is an absolutely important one, and it's one I often say to European policymakers and Americans when I meet them, that this idea that it's completely fractured is, look, don't buy into that. Compare it to 2-3 years ago. The past 44 years, we've not seen the Iranian diaspora come out like this together. But, and there is a but, and I think it's an important but, we have a diaspora community that obviously has different political ideologies, we have different views on form of governance. All of that aside, that needs for, until the Islamic Republic exists, we shouldn't even be thinking about those issues. The goal should be aligning ourselves alongside of each other. And I want to actually, for the first time, quote Khamenei, and I've said this in Farsi. Khamenei said when he was talking to, I think it was in 2013, he was talking to IRGC cultural officials about how to mobilize. He said, we need to create an organizing structure. We need to create networks. And this person and that person, they may disagree with each other, but they need to stand alongside each other in a front facing our enemies. They mean us. We need to repeat that strategy against the Islamic Republic, because that's how we can succeed. When we're united, we may have disagreements, left, right, form of governance, whatever. The people of Iran will decide that. But until the young Iranian women, our men, are going on the streets, they're getting killed. Meanwhile, we are discussing issues that, quite frankly, all our focus should be on them and supporting them. And the key point, I think, here is practical support. And that's where we can have an impact. As I said, 8 to 11 million Iranians, very successful. Apparently, we're the most successful immigrant community in the world, according to the BBC. But I don't usually listen to the BBC these days. But they may be right on that. But we need to come together. We need to think about practical support. We need to forget our differences. If that means X group setting up a group and working on its own and doing its own things, setting up its own strike fund, doing whatever, that's fine. Y group can do the same. As long as that practical support reaches the hands of the Iranian people, it doesn't matter. We have one goal, and that's fighting the Islamic Republic, and we can only do that if we're alongside each other. The Islamic Republic has the classic strategy, divide and conquer. And I, of course, recognize that what we see online, a lot of it's the cyberies. We know that, of course. They lay the traps, and unfortunately, of course, it's a heated kind of emotional environment, and sometimes people go head first into the traps. Let's stop. If what we say doesn't hurt the Islamic Republic, don't say it. Focus on the goal. Let's focus on practical support, and we can do it. We have enormous resources. We can have immense impact, just like we had last year. In that October to December period. We need to go back to that, and the focus should be Islamic Republic. And if we do that, focusing on practical support, I have no doubt that we'll be successful, because when we came together, that's when the IRGC, that's when the Beta Rahbari, that's when they were worried. And we need to do that again.
Thank you. Michael?
I'll say the same thing I say when I work with Armenians or Kurds or other communities. The audience can't be yourselves. The audience has to be those outside. I can't add better than what we've already heard from my co-panelists, but the key audience has to be the non-Iranian American policymaker to push your way through and to get over this final hurdle. Thank you.
Thank you. Cameron, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to pick up very briefly on what Kasra said, which I think is perhaps the most critical thing. We talked about unity. We got that out of the way. We're all aligned. But it's the practical bits, because I think one problem with this concept of unity is we think, okay, let's set up a revolutionary council, or let's get these 10 people in a room, or these 2 people in a room, or these 5 people in a room, and that's it. We've done it. We checked the box. Now we have unity. I think that's the totally wrong approach. I think that focusing on projects, whether it's the Project Constellation that you mentioned that you all are doing, whether it's the Massa Act, whether it's supporting ex-government to set up a strike fund, or this Iranian group doing it themselves, and having a project-focused mindset, things that you can actually deliver, and then when your group or my group or group X or Y or Z does it, then everyone should support that project, not because of who's leading the project or who's involved, or do we have 7 monarchists, 6 Republicans, 3 communists, and 2 pink-haired right-wingers. That doesn't really matter. Do you have people who are doing projects, not just choosing people because we're trying to check off every letter in the box and say, okay, we got everyone, and now we need a Mongolian too. We're not going to find everyone to do this. We're not going to find all these people. It's not painting a picture. We're trying to put projects that support the people of Iran. So that point you made is so critical.
And just on that, it's about the practical support. We don't need photo shoots. We don't need Twitter posts. That's not going to bring change to Iran. It's the practical element. We need to be practically focused, project-based. And as you said, different groups doing their own thing, that's fine. We need to support it, because ultimately that's what's going to bring about change. And it's geared towards the people of Iran.
Thank you. I want to open it up to the audience a little bit now, and you'll see there are 2 microphones. Oh, okay, great. Okay. So I see one hand in the back over there, sir. With the white shirt, sir? Yes, please. And state your name and affiliation, please. I think that there'll be a microphone over there. Yes.
حسین مشعشع نزدیک به 30 سال است که با CPI کار میکنم، Constitutional Monarchy of Iran، و نزدیک 45 سال است که علیه خمینی میجنگم.
Sir, would you mind making your question in English so everyone can?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with CPI organization, which is Constitutional Monarchy of Iran, and I've been fighting with this regime more than 45 years. Means before Khomeini walks in Iran. I was in Iran when I was 18. My grandmother and my father told me this is a propaganda from other countries. Do not get involved. They're dangerous. You don't know what the mullahs doing to us, but it happens. After I came to the United States, Mr. Reagan said, Mr. Carter made the biggest mistake in history by helping to remove the king of Iran. That's not what I'm saying. Mr. Reagan said. So I've been fighting on the street, on his speeches, everywhere. Now, I enjoyed all your speakers, Kasra and Morgan and the other gentlemen. But the point I want to add is, don't you think the whole Western world, a member of NATO, should realize that we are facing another Hitler system in Iran? And the whole free world should see the bigger picture of the future of the world, not just personal benefits. They have been dealing, mismatching messages to Iran. Of course, the whole Iran rised up, but we have a problem. We have a problem with Obama. We have a problem with Clinton. We have a problem with Biden. I'm brave enough to bring it out. Obama brought sons and daughters of these mullahs to the United States with billions of dollars.
Sir, could you just phrase this in a question so we can have our speakers interact with it? Thank you.
They are living among us everywhere in the world. They trying to transfer the revolution, Islamic revolution, to a world. If we don't stop that, we're not going to be safe anywhere. We have to stop, I think we should stop and freeze all the assets of the mullah sons and daughters all over the world, Western world, NATO countries. Don't you think so, Kasra?
Right.
Thank you.
Kasra, you raised that point earlier. You want to delve into that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, on the ideological point, part of the IRGC's ideology, and it's extremely worrying, and we warned about this, we did a study on it, the militaristic doctrine of Mahdiism. And on that point, we see, particularly after 2009, they place more emphasis on this militaristic doctrine of Mahdiism. Now, the militaristic doctrine of Mahdiism says that there are barriers to the return of the 12th Imam, the hidden Imam, so-called hidden Imam, and that the IRGC is the military vehicle to remove these barriers. And this is what is being taught in indoctrination classes in the IRGC, particularly from 2009 onwards. IRGC indoctrinators are teaching their recruits that the biggest barrier is Israel's existence, and they draw on Shia narrations that state that before Mahdi arrives, there will be a final apocalyptic war with the Jews where Shias emanating from Iran, as well as the other regions, will destroy the state of Israel. There'll be rivers of blood, etc., etc. Now, we are seeing, particularly amongst the third and fourth generation of IRGC, so the younger generation, there's a rising cult of Mahdiism. Now, this cult of Mahdiism views the Islamic Republic's ballistic missile program, militia program, and nuclear program as tools that can support Mahdi in his apocalyptic war. Why I'm saying this is the single biggest threat to the existence of the state of Israel. What is particularly worrying is that right now, as we are seeing terrorist attacks on the state of Israel, the IRGC is doubling down on this Mahdiist narrative, doubling down on this Mahdiist doctrine. So that's particularly worrying. On the assets and the oligarchs, I think I've said that task force needs to be joint, transatlantic, treat Khamenei oligarchs no differently to that of Putin's. They are both totalitarian, kleptocratic, corrupt regimes to their core. So we need that instantly.
Thank you. Sir in the blue shirt over there? Yes.
Good morning. Good morning to the panelists. Good morning to everybody in the room. This question goes for Mrs. Morgan. Morgan, 3 weeks ago on Wednesday in Georgetown University, Negar Mortazavi from Nyack with 15 people of her friends were there. 100 people in that room, 80 of them were students, laptop on their laps or notes taking. And Negar Mortazavi just washed out every crime that this regime did by saying the total opposition of Iranian regime is only 200,000 people, and they are just a group of young people. They worry about their appearance. They want to be free like you, have no hijab. She mentioned that the killing of Mahsa was not a murder. She died. She mentioned that this regime is not the type of regime that picks up somebody on the street and kills them. No, this regime does not do that. She mentioned that the entire Revolutionary Guards and the people pick up people in the streets or shoots people. They are they doing their job. They are not there to hurt people. They have no. They are not doing.
Can we put this in the form of a question because we're running out of time very
Yes, sir.
quickly? Thank you.
Morgan, one of the problem we have is that our students in the schools are being penetrated. Our government, from Pentagon to the White House, been penetrated by these infiltrators. And I spoke with Dr. Rubin before, and I texted him about that. This is where we also have a huge problem. What are we going to do about this danger?
Sir, thank you for bringing that to the forefront. I think it's a very, very important conversation that we need to be having, particularly in our universities. Our university system clearly is being penetrated by propagandists who seek to whitewash the regime in Iran, just as we have blatant anti-Semitism reaping through campuses right now. It is a very hostile place to be a Jew, quite frankly. And I think that at this point, what do we do about it? I think it's important that the Iranian community, the Iranian diaspora, counteract that narrative. They combat that narrative. They join together and they seek to create their own narrative. It's been a little while since I've been in college, but I don't know what that current presence, that student presence looks like now. But there has to be a movement to push back on NIAC. I think at this point, look, colleges and universities, they're going to declare that everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome if you have a certain message, right? And I think that's what we're seeing with NIAC right now. So I do encourage young people, students, they need to mobilize and they need to push back on this narrative, because otherwise these propagandists are they're going to win, and it's going to be their narrative that becomes truth.
Thank you. And one last question. Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Rabiani. I'm an Iranian American activist that's been working on the MASA Act. And I have a question for Morgan. More so, just I want you to expand on a point you made earlier about congressional offices needing to hear a unified voice from the diaspora and a specific ask. So I wanted to see if you could expand on that point. And this question is also directed at the rest of the panel, if you would also like to provide some insight, because there are a lot of Iranian American activists here who do reach out on a regular basis to congressional offices. And if you could provide some advice for us, that would be amazing.
Love that question. Love it. And I love it because as a former congressional staffer, I would often meet with advocacy groups from the Iranian diaspora, and as sympathetic and as empathetic I was to their message, what was the ask? What do you want me to do with this information that you're sharing with me? My heart is with you, and I want to help you, but I don't know how. And so that is why I think congressional staffers will need to rely on the Iranian diaspora to deliver specific messages that are easily transferable to their bosses. Communication is so critical. And I mean, Cameron, I love your report. It's very long.
I've gotten that feedback before.
So for example, one of the things that I've tried to do at GINSA is we also do very long reports, but what we also try to do is create key findings sections. They're 2 pages that really break down the points and include recommendations, actionable recommendations. Not there should be a strategy for this or there needs to be a policy change here, but very practical steps that Congress can make, or frankly the administration, because otherwise, those meetings, they're not going to get you anywhere.
I feel my board chair's eyes glaring on me after your comment, because for the past 6 months he's been telling me to take maximum support and break it down into one Instagram post per thing, so I could just feel him staring from over there. But for whoever works on the Hill or with people in Congress, as you leave today, we will have a small bottle of Xanax and bottle of tequila for you as you leave. So please grab that as your parting gift. Yeah.
Michael?
And actually, very quickly, I just want to add one thing to what Morgan said with regard to the ask. Congressmen or officials in the Pentagon or the State Department could have 10 meetings a day. And if you do not ask them for something which is going to force them to continue to work and to task staffers, your meeting is going to be forgotten within an hour. The importance of the ask isn't simply what you want to ask. It's to get the gears of policy working in a more continuous way so that they have to research, they have to learn, and they have to digest. Otherwise, it's in through one ear, out through the other.
Wise counsel. And I think we're going to have to conclude there because we're sadly out of time. But thank you for all for this wonderful panel.
Thank you to the panelists. Please join us for a brief coffee break.